We're going live. Shubham, you're there on Twitter?
Yeah, I think so.
Match follow.
Shwani? What?
So,
Vivek, let me know when we're ready.
1 minute left.
Sure.
Midnight.
Hi, guys. Good morning. Welcome to our session on cold brew. So Rasika Taluskar was supposed to take the session, but she had an emergency. So I'm here. My name is Shubham Chawla. I work in product at Something's Brewing, and I have been a coffee roaster in the past and an avid home brewer. So uh, before I move on, I want to tell you about a little bit about what we're doing here. We're basically going to start with how to do a basic cold brew. We have some ready here. We'll talk about different coffees we can use for cold brewing at home, different grind sizes, a few interesting beverages with the final product of cold brew. And if anybody has any questions during the session, please feel free to interrupt. Let's make this an interactive session. And yeah, I'll keep telling you whatever little bit I've learned over the years on cold brewing and the different beverages we can make with it. So I hope to have a good session with you guys. Uh, so to begin with, we're going to start with how we brew cold brew at home. So we use a Toddy Home. A Toddy Home is a Toddy is an American company which bakes great cold brewing equipment. So the Toddy Home can do about 2.5 liters in one go. I'll get into how to brew with it in a few minutes. We've taken a liter out over here. Uh, Finished cold brew can be stored in the fridge for up to a week at best, but I suggest storing it for 3 to 4 days. It works pretty well. Before we move into using the finished cold brew, I'll actually just start with how to brew the cold brew at home. So uh, also, I'm going to use a Toddy Home. There are various brewers you can use. You can use a Toddy Artisan, which is a smaller kind of brewer. You can use a Hariomi Sodashi, which is more of a jar style, which doesn't use paper filtration, which we'll discuss a little later. or the different filtration methods for cold brew and how that can impact your final beverage quality. Um, I'll start with the basic toddy home method, and then we'll get into the nitty-gritties, right? So the toddy home uses a paper filter. How a paper filter is different from a mesh filter or any other kind of filter with slightly larger holes is that this would filter out a lot of grit and a lot of the fines from the coffee. This goes a long way in storage. So if you're brewing coffee, cold brew with a paper filter, you can be rest assured that it'll last up to a week in the fridge if stored well. But if you use something like or maybe a Mizodashi or another kind of filter that doesn't use paper filtration, you're going to have a slightly shorter life, right? So the Toddy Home does about 2.5 liters in one go. I'll just break the components down. So I've opened the paper filter out for you guys to see. Um, there is a felt at the bottom, which is removable, which kind of looks like this. It's reusable. So the felt filter, after brewing, you just wash it and you put it in the fridge if you aren't using it. So the felt is in the bottom. I'm gonna take the bag. Before we get into the actual brewing, let's discuss ratios. So I personally prefer a 1:10 ratio for my cold brew. So I'm using 250 grams of coffee and 2.5 liters, which my colleague Shivangi has actually measured for me over here. So 2.5 liters of water and 250 grams of coffee. This coffee is coarsely ground. A medium coarse to a coarse grind size works best for cold brew. That is because you're doing a longer extraction at room temperature or colder. Um, at room temperature or colder, right? So if you can, I'm not sure if this is in focus. So we're using a medium coarse grind size, as I can see. You can even go coarse. So if you use a finer grind size, you're basically enabling a quicker, higher extraction. I'm sure Rasika would have covered this in previous sessions, but the finer your grind size, the more surface area, the more contact between water and coffee, and the quicker, the higher the extraction. Which is why when you look at a mocha pot or an espresso, you go really fine, right? Because it's a quicker form of extraction. It's a high pressure extraction. So we'll take the 250 grams of coffee weighed out here. Uh, an option is to pre-wet your filter. That's what we do in most pour-overs. We always do it with with unbleached filters, which are basically brown in color, where the bleaching hasn't been done. But this is a bleached filter. We'll just go ahead with without um, without pre-wetting the filter. So I've put 250 grams of medium coarse ground coffee. Again, I mean, it's up to you to experiment. I know some people who actually experiment with uh, the same coffee in different grind sizes in the same bag. So you'll have a medium, of course, and a fine. You know, a little bit of fines as well to get a little bit of that body out. Now, yeah, okay, this is a mistake which I made. Thank you, Shahami. Okay, so the mistake I was going to make, which you all would also make if you have this at home, or could make, is that the felt filter, right? The felt is basically going to allow water to go through. At the bottom, put the rubber stopper. Now, this rubber stopper is actually what stops the coffee from or water at the stage from coming out. So, thanks. So you put the rubber stopper at the bottom before you pour your water in. Now I start again. There are different schools of thought to this. Some people like to pour the water on the side. Some people pour it directly into the basket, the bag. I pour directly into the basket. I feel like you're ultimately wetting the grounds more evenly, more quick, and a little better. So I'm just slowly pouring all the water in, making sure all the grounds are wet. So I'm adding room temperature water. Now there is something called blooming in cold brew as well. It's not very common, but what blooming in cold brew actually is that it's called a hot bloom actually. What some people do is they'll add about when you have about 250 grams of coffee, you would add maybe 250 ml of water, but it's hot water, right? So instead of adding room temperature water, you add 250 ml, a 1:1 ratio of hot water, and then you add room temperature water or colder water. So in that first about 1 to 2 minutes, when you've added hot water to your coarsely ground coffee, you're kind of getting the more brighter elements, the acidity out of the coffee. And then when you add the room temperature, you're kind of like, equalizing it. So I mean, a hot bloom is something I like as well. But if you're typically going to use your cold brew for like mixed beverages and cocktails and that kind of stuff, you may not want a hot bloom because you want your cold brew to be more nutty, more chocolatey, and not have that bright undertone. So a hot bloom is something you guys should definitely read up a little bit about. So I'm just like going to show you. So usually now once you're done with this, you don't have to keep it on top of this. I'm just showing you how it sits. You just put the rubber lid on top, right? Or have a timer ready, or know when you put it in. So this basically sits on your countertop or your fridge, or depending on what kind of extraction you want. So cold brews can go all the way from 10 to 12 hours up to 24 hours. If you're going the higher on the higher side, you ideally want to keep it in the fridge or somewhere really cool. To slow the extraction down, the hotter temperature would basically mean higher extraction, quicker extraction. If you're doing a 12-hour extraction, countertops fine. Now this is something you will learn over time. You will master your coffee grind. So the parameters, right? Very important parameters to understand. Your coffee grind size. The finer you are, the more the extraction. So you balance that out. The coffee to water ratio. 1:10 is what I use. If you want a stronger, if you want a more concentrated cold brew, you go 1:8. I know people go 1:5. Going under 1:5 is like wasteful. I've tried it. Why is it wasteful? Because coffee absorbs at least as much weight of water as is the weight of the coffee. So if I have 250 grams of coffee, I'm absorbing upwards of 250 ml of water just to ground soak it, right? It's like when you make chai, when you make tea with tea leaves expand. They've absorbed some water. Now, when you make tea with tea leaves, we use a gram or 2 grams of tea leaves at best. Now, when we multiply that by 250, that's a lot of water absorption by weight happening. So if you do a 1:5, say one part is anyway absorbed by the coffee, so you only have 4 parts out. But then you have a concentrated cold brew, which can be cut with ice, with water, with milk, with anything, right? Okay, so now that this is ready,
Can you explain about blooming once again? Then understand what bloom and importance of blooming.
right. So blooming typically is something that we say is a process that is used in hot brews usually. So when we do a pour over, a bloom is basically the initial part of brewing when the coffee is fresh, we add hot water first instead of initially starting the extraction to ensure the carbon dioxide is allowed to escape from the coffee so that the extraction is even, the brew is more even and more smooth. A hot bloom is something slightly different. A hot bloom in cold brew is basically when the initial part of the cold brew, the first couple of minutes, we add hot water upwards of 80 degrees Celsius to the coffee to extract some of the more brighter acidic elements of the coffee, right? Because if we don't add hot water, we're going to get more of the chocolatey or the nutty undertones out of the coffee and leave out the acidity. So when we brew coffee at home, coffee obviously has a whole plethora of flavors, right? It's very wide range. So your extraction is what will define how your coffee tastes. So if you do a higher temperature, looking at more acidity. If you look at a lower temperature, longer form brewing, you're looking at more chocolatey, nutty notes. These are like thumb rules, right? Obviously, a lot of this varies on origin and roast profile as well, which we can discuss if you have any questions at all. Origin, processing, and roast profile. But what we can control is brewing, so that's what we try to learn more about. So, thank you. Did that? Okay, awesome. Any other questions? Please keep shooting away. Thank you so much. I'm just keeping this on the side. We will have this in the office on Monday. Hopefully, somebody will extract this tonight. Okay, so uh, we've brewed some of the cold brew. Um, Before we move into using the cold brew and brewing with it, we should also be discussing a little bit of the cold brew blends, right? So you have a lot of cold brews in the market that are marketed as that beans that are marketed as cold brews. A lot of roasters go through a lot of pain to create their cold brew blend, and it requires a lot more time than a typical hot coffee blend, right? Because to define if a cold brew is good or not, it's a labor of love. It takes so long. So, for example, I would take 3 different origins of coffee, roasted maybe 3 different ways, and now I'm creating different ratios by weight of this basis, the processing method and the flavor profiles of single cupping of each of the coffees. Now, when I've created different blends, I will maybe take 100 grams of coffee and 1 liter of water and keep making different cold brews with each of the blends, and then have to wait 12 plus hours to actually taste it. So you actually don't know what is happening with the coffee, if it's going to actually turn out to be as good as you thought or you predicted it to be. So cold brew blends take a lot of effort for a lot of roasters, and you have a lot in the market. So I would suggest you go out and you try all of them and see what you prefer. If you don't like any, you can experiment with espresso blends as well. Or you can even take an espresso blend and a lighter single origin meant for filter, and you can try creating your own blends, right? Because ultimately, a cold brew needs to be very balanced, and you can actually, it thrives when you have multiple roast profiles in the same blend, as opposed to an espresso blend, which would ideally not, it would not do well if you have any lighter or medium light coffees in it. But with cold brew, it's more forgiving. So yeah, if anybody has any questions on that note, we can discuss that. If
there is one question.
huh.
How long do you brew it? Can you explain the coffee ground versus brew time? Does it change for hot brew versus cold?
Okay, cool. So the first question, how long do you brew? So the minimum I brew my cold brew is 12 hours. Uh, that's the least amount of time I would give a 1:10 ratio to come out fairly rounded and balanced. If this is at room temperature, and when I say room temperature, I mean, I'm assuming everybody's in India. It varies from 25 to 32, 33 degrees. You don't want to keep it in direct sunlight. You want to keep it in a fairly cool, dark place. Uh, Assuming it's 30 degrees, it's 12 hours, right? If you want to put this, I mean, this is a little hard to fit in a fridge, but if you have like a Mizudashi or something that fits very snugly, or a Toddy Artisan, which is also a very beautiful looking glass brewer, that fits on the side racks of your fridge. If you're putting it there, I would say at least 18 hours, because once you go under 10 degrees, you're, you're, you're actually almost doubling your extraction time, right? So that's the extraction time. The grind size was another question, right? So the grind size, again, uh, consistency is fairly important. It's more important than whether you choose to go medium coarse or coarse. You want good quality coffee ground with a good grinder, and by good grinder, I mean consistent grinder. You don't want too many fines in your final coffee grounds, right? So if you take a coarsely ground coffee, you're looking for a longer extraction time. If you're taking a medium coarse coffee, you're looking for a slightly shorter extraction time, right? So think of it this way, that think of it in terms of sand. The finer your sand, uh, the more surface area is exposed, right? So if you, for example, if you were to just take, uh, imagine this is like a cylinder. So if you just take this like this, you only have one surface area here, one top, one bottom. If I was to slice this in half, I'm creating two more surfaces. So I'm creating more surfaces for the water to come in contact with, the more I break down something. So the finer you go in your grind size, the more surface area, the more extraction, the quicker the extraction. The last question was to do with hot bloom. Yes. Okay. So the hot bloom, right? Now the hot bloom is basically like supercharging. You're supercharging your coffee. In the long run, supercharging has no impact. So when you're running a marathon, when you're cold brewing, your hot bloom will not reduce the extraction time. But you have to be super careful about when you nitrocharge in a race, right? And how you do it. So you don't want your hot bloom to be a very high temperature. Even 70 degrees is fine, even 80 degrees is fine. It doesn't have to be 90. Or you don't want it to be for too long, because then it's like a hot coffee. I mean, I would do it for 15 seconds tops. People go higher, but you just need that boost for the right amount of time. Over and above that, you're just, it's overkill. It's unnecessary. You'll go crash a wall. So so that's with the hot bloom, right? 15 seconds to 30 seconds. You can go up 2 minutes. Do we have
one more question?
Yeah.
What coffee should one choose for a cold brew? How do they roast the coffee for cold brew? Can you break it as a bonus?
Fair. Perfect. Okay. So what coffee should you choose for cold brew? You know, I tell people, with everything to do with coffee, especially in manual brewing, this is purely personal preference. Uh, you do not want an extremely dark roast which has too many oils coming out, for multiple reasons. For practical purposes, if you have a coffee that literally has oils coming out before you grind it, it's not going to hold very long. Like we've kept this in a bottle, right? And we can keep this in a fridge. If you brewed it with super dark roast, it'll go rancid in like a day or two, right? If you use an extremely light roast, then have Nimu Pani. I mean, I'm joking, but if you have an extremely light roast in a cold brew, you'd rather have like an iced pour over. Japanese style iced pour over will bring out that acidity even better. I believe a cold brew is all about balance. If you want a super strong cup of coffee, a mocha pot would do a better job than a super dark cold brew. And if you take a super light roast, I believe a Japanese iced pour over would do a way better job than a super light cold brew, right? So, what a cold brew does in the long run is equalizes. That's what my understanding of cold brews, and that's what I'm trying to explain here. So you go from medium light to medium dark. You can go dark, you can go light. You can create your blends as per your personal preferences. I love adding a few grams of a light roast in a 20-gram sampler of a cold brew blend, which I would be using, which just adds a little bit of zing to it. But again, it's personal preferences. I would say you start with a solid medium roast and see if you like it. If you think it's too bitter, if you think it's got too much body, go lighter. If you think it's not giving you a punch, go darker. You can alternatively also change brand size, change ratios, change extraction time, or you can change your coffee. I hope that answered the question. The next question was, that's it. Okay. No, there was something about how would you roast your coffee, right?
Yes, how they roast the coffee.
How would you? Okay. So, cold brew is more about the blend creation. The roasting style is a style that a roaster develops. That would not change drastically. The style wouldn't change drastically if I'm roasting for an espresso or a light roast. The style, as in by style, I mean how you charge. Do you do a soak, like that kind of stuff? In a while setting a roast profile, the style is something that is innate to you, which you've developed over time, which you've mastered. Uh, with cold brew, it's more about like espresso, it's more about blend creation. Trust me, when I was a roaster, I've had so many blends turn out so bad, which I thought would turn out great, and I've had countless sleepless nights. And Rasika has also been one of the people who, I mean, I've made her have very crappy cold brews, and she's made me have very crappy espressos while we were creating new blends. The point is, we can all think we know what we're doing, and most times we do, but there are times when we're just blown away both positively and negatively. And the science to blend creation ultimately is you understand your individual coffees a little better, and then you create your blend basis your understanding of those individual coffees and basis what notes you want in your final cup is when you decide what kind of ratio you're looking for, right? I hope that answered your question. We'll move. Sorry, ice pighal rahi hai, all the ice is melting. So we'll move on to one of these very nice beverages. So we have some syrups from this brand called Swa. It's Bangalore based. It's all natural, which is what is great about it. Um, yeah, it's all natural, which also means that you keep it in the fridge once it's open. Yeah. So so we usually weigh this out, but since this is a home brewing session, I'm going to speak in grams and we'll try and convert it for home brewers who may not have a scale as well, right? So the first drink we'll make is a cold brew. I've tried this cold brew. It's fairly rounded. It can hold milk. It can hold these syrups. If it's a very light cold brew, you just want to have it over ice, right? You don't want to add too many things to it. So we'll make a mango passion uh, cold brew. So this syrup has Alfonso mango, passion fruit, lemon, and pineapple. Obviously, sugar and water. Um, so we add about 100 grams of ice. Now, 100 grams of ice would vary from 5 to 10 cubes depending on the size of your ice tray. But if you take the average Samsung refrigerator ice tray, which has small cubes, about 10 cubes of those. Again, we're putting this in a cocktail shaker, right? So it's not like we're gonna have all of the ice get diluted uh, to create this beverage. Also, on a side note, I mean, I'm using a shaker. At home, I would just also create a lot of stirred beverages, so you don't have to use a shaker. You can even stir it in, and yeah, reduce the amount of ice. So 100 grams of ice, we would put 100 ml of cold brew. Sorry, 1 second. I am eyeballing. So 100 ml of cold brew is basically a little less than a teacup, right? A teacup is 150 ml, a coffee mug is 250 ml. So that's your balance. I have a teaspoon here. Uh, Between 25 to 30 grams of sour syrup, depending on how sweet you want it to be. 1 tablespoon would hold about 12 grams, right? So I'm just going to add 2 tablespoons. And if you're like me, you just want to use a spoon to mix it in so you're not wasting any of that sugar water, right? And that's basically it. It's super simple. So now on the mango passion, I mean, you can garnish it with an orange slice. You can garnish it with some mint. I was told by Rasika it was an orange slice, but I'm going rogue. I prefer mint. So yeah, so you just put a little bit of mint on top. Yeah, in fact, you can even add, I mean, with 2 spoons of the mango passion syrup, you can even add slightly more coffee if you want it to be stronger. I like it like this. It's a bit sweet. It's nice for a Saturday morning. It's not a weekday. I don't have to work after this. So this is actually really good. So this was the mango passion. We will also move on to maybe another sour syrup. But before that, I want to talk about how you can just have it straight up, right? So when you're having a cold brew straight up, that is not refrigerated yet. This has just been, so this was set to brew last evening. It was filtered out this morning and it's not been chilled. So you just add some of the cold brew in a glass, you take your ice. Now, my favorite way to have cold brew at home is once this is done, I take a little bit of jaggery syrup. Jaggery syrup is super simple to make. It's nothing complicated. Just take fresh ground jaggery or whole jaggery and start pounding it at home. And do a 1:1 ratio of water to jaggery. Heat it up. It'll become very syrupy. Add a touch of jaggery syrup. So when I say touch, I mean like 1 teaspoon, not too much. You don't want it to be overpoweringly sweet. You can add 1 tablespoon as well. I just prefer a little bit of less jaggery. And lime. So like half a large lime squeezed in, and that's like the most refreshing summertime beverage. It's actually a coffee lemonade in a lot of cafes. It's picking up. It's called the Mazagran in Portugal. I've spoken about this in the past. It's just a lovely summer beverage to have, and winters if you live in Chennai or Bombay. But here in Bangalore, it's a great beverage throughout the year. Uh, so that's how you would have the cold brew straight up. Another way to have it obviously is once this is done, you can just add a little bit of condensed milk, milk made, minute made, whatever, not minute made, milk made, mithai made is what I think Amul calls it. So that's a great dessert as well. Uh, Cold brew is also the best way to bake with. Before I move on to the other beverages, so when I have to cook something with coffee, I would use cold brew. How would I brew my cold brew? Not like this. I would do a 1:5 ratio. It's super concentrated. I'm pulling everything I can out of the coffee. It's bitter. It's not the best to have straight up, but that's because when you're adding cream, sugar, depending on what you're baking, if you're making a tiramisu, you want it to stand out, right? If you go to a restaurant, you have a tiramisu, and if they used a nice light pour over to make it, what would you taste? You would just taste cream, coffee, and cocoa, right? You wouldn't taste coffee. So when you're cooking with coffee, you want to get the punch out of coffee. So do a cold brew is like my favorite way to brew for cooking with coffee, and you go very concentrated. You get a strong extraction out. I also use it to make Baileys at home. So homemade Baileys. It's not very complicated. It's just a five ingredient recipe. It is concentrated cold brew, Jameson, preferably an Irish whiskey like Jameson. If you don't have access to that, Macintosh is a great option. Vanilla, freshly extracted, is best. Condensed milk and whipped cream. Yeah, I'm not missing anything out. Yeah, that's and chocolate. And for chocolate, you can either use like a cocoa powder and then sweeten it, or if you're like me, just take a nice bar of silk and double boil it and melt it out. And that's where all the guilt um, goes. So that's that. Do we have any questions? If yes, I would love to answer them. If not, we can make maybe a milk-based flavored beverage. Okay, cool. Cool. Okay, so the next beverage we have, I will not be using a shaker for this. I will just use a glass. So this is, so I love both orange and chocolate in my coffee. When if it's not like a pour over, if it's like a flavored beverage, I think orange and chocolate are my favorite. So this syrup is a coffee orange cocoa syrup, and we'll garnish it with a cinnamon attack. So I'm gonna take some ice. Again, so we'll do the similar 100 grams of ice. We do 100 grams of ice. I'm gonna add my cold brew, which is equal parts by weight. And two tablespoons of the syrup. So this one, with a garnish of cinnamon, would taste well with milk as well. And I'm just gonna have it straight up once and tell you what I think, and then we'll add about 30 ml of milk. It is great as is as well, but I know that this would be able to hold some milk as well with the way it tastes. So yeah, some fresh cold milk. Yeah, even better. This is great for like a afternoon if you've eaten too much food and you want to feel even more full. That is lovely. Right. So do we have any questions? No questions. Okay. Cool. Should we move on to another beverage? Or should we move on to another beverage? Okay, perfect. So I think the last beverage, we'll keep it super simple. And this is again one of my guilty pleasures. Apologies, I kept the tonic water on the side. So it's a simple coffee tonic. I mean, I would prefer to use artisanal tonic. We have a lot of brands in India. But all we have in office today is Schweppes. I think everybody finished the Swami or whatever else we had. Okay, so this is also super simple, guys. A coffee tonic is literally what it is. A coffee tonic. I remember somebody was telling me this story about this uncle they met somewhere in the north, and he's like, cold brew and lemonade is the best. Coffee, lemonade पियो और अगर ज़्यादा पैसे हैं तो lemonade की जगह tonic डाल देना. So if you have a lot of money, just add tonic as per that old ex-army uh, major one said. But again, like a coffee tonic is super simple. It's super refreshing. In fact, a tonic is basically a little bit of sugar and quinine. And quinine is bitter. At least it has a bitter taste. And that's what I think really balances a cold brew out as well. You don't need to add sugar. The tonic is already slightly sweet, slightly bitter. The coffee just adds another level of kick to it. It's like Red Bull supercharged, right? And also delicious. So just add a cold brew. I mean, you can also do this with an espresso, by the way. This is a cold brew workshop, so I'm using cold brew. Again, for a coffee tonic, I would suggest your cold brew is slightly more on the concentrated side and not on the weaker side, because it'll get lost with the tonic. And this fizzing is what would typically happen. It changes if you add the tonic first and then the coffee, but it's fizzier like this.
Which is your favorite?
Which is my favorite what?
Espresso or cold brew tonic?
Okay. Most people I speak to say they prefer the cold brew tonic. I personally prefer the espresso tonic. I love the fact that you get a nice head. You get an actual head. Like if you're having a nitro beer, if you're having a Guinness, you get an actual head on an espresso tonic, which most people I don't know don't like, but I personally prefer an espresso tonic. But even most places, I think most cafes you go to and you order a coffee tonic, we usually use a cold brew. Yeah, but if you were to ask me, thanks, I would prefer an espresso tonic. So you know what's happening with the rest of this tonic? It's going with an espresso. But yeah, do we have more questions?
Can you tell us some classic flavor combinations for cold brew cocktails?
Okay, cool. I'll be honest. Cold brew cocktails, like I use cold brew to make Baileys. I don't make too many cold brew cocktails because I personally avoid having coffee post 2 p.m. This is a slightly a fluid rule. Some days it becomes 4 p.m. But most days, yeah, I stick at 2 p.m. Uh, a lot of people I know, a very popular beverage is espresso martini. A lot of bars in India don't have espresso machines, so they make a twist with the espresso martini and use a cold brew instead. Make a cold brew martini. Uh, a lot of people also I know add. It's called no sleep GNT. I've had it once. I prefer my gin and tonics as is, but a lot of people like no sleep GNTs. I think Greater Than made it popular. It's basically a gin and tonic with cold brew in it. Uh, there is also a pretty popular beverage where it's just a vodka orange juice, but you add a cold brew to it. That makes a lot of sense to me. I think orange and cold brew is a great combination. So just freshly squeezed orange juice, cold brew and ice, nothing like it. If you want to add a few bitters to it, angostura or otherwise, insane. So vodka, uh, orange juice, and cold brew also a great combination. Yeah, I mean those are a few of my suggestions. I like my coffee separately and my alcohol separately usually, but yeah, but I know a lot of friends who like a lot of these beverages as well. So that's why you could start. Do we have more questions? Okay, awesome. So I mean, I'm still here. If anybody wants to either type questions or if you want to get on the audio and ask a few questions, I think out of all the beverages we made today, I think the mango passion cold brew is, uh, yeah, one of the nicer ones. Yeah. Nothing. Shivangi, Vivek, do you have any questions? Although Shivangi has is a trainer as well. You waiting to drink? Cool. We'll turn the camera off and then we'll all have some cold brew tonics and mango passion.
Just wait for 3 minutes.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
So there is one not related to cold brew, but how do we explore tasting notes? Any suggestions or resources?
Yeah, cool. Suggestions. First suggestions. If you're a smoker, quit smoking. I quit 6 years ago. That changed my life. I didn't quit for coffee. I quit for myself, and I think I started loving my whatever I ate and drank like a million times more. So that's the first one. The second one is we all eat a lot of. So these are like just. I'll start with like the harder stuff, right? Like quitting smoking, reduce the amount of spicy food that you eat. I mean, I grew up in Chennai. There's a lot of tamarind, a lot of masalas there. Punjabi, we also use a lot of masalas. Uh, if you reduce your spice levels in your food, you will taste more of the blander stuff, right? Your senses become more heightened. So um, you don't if you don't. So the idea why I'm saying this is you don't have to quit for life. You don't have to reduce spicy food for life. Simple. Before you have your coffee, 3 hours before that, don't smoke. 3 hours before you try your coffee, you don't have spicy food, right? You don't have poha and then have your coffee, then you'll only taste poha, right? Or don't have idli with sambar. Just have plain idli if you're hungry, right? Or put a little bit of sugar or just plain coconut chutney. Point is, keep your palate clean before you taste. Uh, this is like quick stuff. In the longer run, I think to be aware and cognizant of what you're doing, right? Uh, to be in that moment and actually think about what you're tasting. Shut your eyes. It won't make any difference on day one, but at day 30, at day 45, it will automatically happen and you'll be like, hey, I had the same coffee for a week and I couldn't taste this, but now I'm tasting something else, right? So this is a slow journey, a long journey, which you need to be committed to. That's my other tip. The final thing would be that don't be disheartened or disappointed, right? A lot of people say that, hey, मुझे ये taste आ रहा है coffee में, or I can taste this in this coffee. And you may not be able to taste it. See, taste also is a little subjective. What somebody else may be tasting may or may not be there. But you don't have to, there should be no FOMO in anything in life, especially in coffee, right? So if you taste it, great. And if you don't taste it, say you don't taste it, and if it's actually there, it'll come to you at some point in life. But to be committed to the game and to keep at it and not getting disheartened, I think is the biggest suggestion I have. Yeah, don't be disheartened if you can't taste something.
Any resources that we might have for tasting notes and cupping or anything?
Oh, so there are great resources that millions of dollars have been invested across the world. There is the SEA, which has come up, which has developed a flavor wheel, which I'm sure all of you are aware of. Counterculture made a twist to the flavor wheel. Aramse from Mysore added a further Indian twist, is trying to add a further Indian twist to the flavor wheel. There are a lot of resources globally available. There is a book by the SCA which basically defines, it'll say what it is. For example, it says lavender, and then it will say what lavender they are referring to, where it's from, and how do you get it. So how do you dilute it with so much maybe water to get the essence out. My point is that there are lots of resources on the internet, but I think the biggest resources start at home. To I mean, for me, way before I got into coffee, I started appreciating the food that we cooked. So when we added different kind of elaichi, or when you add hing, I mean, a lot of us can taste hing, right? I think that's where we start. We take pride in that. And a lot of us can taste rai, mustard seeds, asafrita. The point is, it starts in our kitchen. And then you extrapolate it into coffee, into alcohol, into wine, into anything else, right? But I think from a flavor and a flavor explosion point of view, I think we're so privileged to be Indian because we have access to a million flavors that most people in the West or the East, keeping India in the center, have not even heard about. And they would never even understand the difference between a star anise and a cinnamon. But we do. So maybe we start with that. And obviously, resources internationally, there are lots of resources. The flavor wheel. I hope that answered your question. Great. Yeah. Vivek, who runs our Instagram and social media, has very nicely asked me to ask you all to follow us on Instagram. How did I forget? बहुत गाली पड़ती if I had forgotten. But yeah, please follow us on Instagram. Something's going. We keep posting a lot about coffee. Not as in depth for like a super expert, but we're trying to get people into home brewing. So it's more approachable. It's not intimidating, and you can always reach out to us on Instagram, on Twitter. Something's growing right to us. We have a website. Call our helpline. We have a coffee expert. Always ready to take your questions. Yeah, it was a great Saturday morning. And if we don't have any questions, we'll wrap up. Yeah, great. Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you. Have a great weekend.